Marcus Kane stood in front of the large window on his ship's bridge. Stars moved slowly past as his vessel traveled through deep space. His hands were placed firmly on the metal rail, and his eyes studied the darkness ahead. This was not just any hunt. This was the hunt that would make him the most famous dragon hunter in all of human space. The ship's main screen showed a map of 3 star systems. Red dots marked where the creature had been seen. Yellow lines showed its path of destruction. Marcus had been tracking this beast for 2 months, and now he was close. Very close. "Captain Kane, we're getting stronger readings now," Rebecca Torres called from her seat at the navigation controls. She was a skilled pilot who had worked with Marcus for 3 years. Her brown hair was pulled back and her green eyes focused on the screen in front of her. "The energy signature is definitely getting stronger as we move toward the Kepler sector." Marcus turned to look at her. "How strong?" "Strong enough to power a small city," she replied. "This thing is massive, sir. Bigger than anything we've hunted before." James Mitchell looked up from his weapons station. He was a big man with broad shoulders and hands that seemed too large for the control buttons. His job was to make sure their guns could punch through dragon scales. "The neural disruptors are ready, Captain. All harpoons are loaded with the new tungsten tips. If this beast bleeds, we can kill it." David Sullivan, their engineer, spoke from his position near the engine controls. He was the youngest member of the crew, only 25 years old, but he knew more about ship systems than anyone Marcus had ever met. "Engine power is at full capacity. All systems are running smooth. We're ready for whatever this thing throws at us." Marcus nodded and walked back to his captain's chair. The chair was old leather, worn smooth by years of long hunts. He had sat in the same chair when he killed his first dragon 5 years ago. He had been here when he brought down the great beast that destroyed New Tokyo Station. Now he was here for the biggest hunt of his life. "Tell me about the attack again," he said. To Rebecca Dodge, she touched her screen and brought up a report. "Mining Station Omega 7 in the Kepler sector. The attack happened 6 days ago. The dragon came out of nowhere, moving faster than our sensors could track. It hit the station's main power core first, then tore through the living sections." "How many dead?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. 200 people, James said, his voice hard. "Miners, engineers, their families. The beast killed them all, and then stole half the station's equipment before flying away." Marcus felt the familiar anger burn in his chest. These creatures had been attacking human settlements for 30 years. They came without warning, killed without mercy, and disappeared into deep space. Most people called them solar wings because of their huge wings that seemed to hold starlight. Scientists said they were just animals, beasts left over from some dead alien race, but Marcus knew better. He had seen the way they planned their attacks. He had seen the intelligence in their burning eyes. "The damage to its wing," Marcus said. "Tell me about that." David brought up another screen. "The station's defense guns managed to hit it before it escaped. Plasma cannon fire, direct hit to the left wing. The energy readings show it's badly hurt. It can still fly, but not well. That's why we can track it now." "Good," Marcus said. He stood up and walked to the weapons locker. Inside were the tools of his trade. The kinetic harpoon gun was as long as his arm and could fire a tungsten-tipped spear through 3 feet of solid metal. The neural disruptor looked like a small rifle, but it sent out waves that could shut down a dragon's nervous system for several minutes. There were also regular plasma rifles, emergency medical supplies, and tracking equipment. "How long until we reach the asteroid field?" he asked. 4 hours, Rebecca answered. "The creature is hiding in the old mining sector. Lots of abandoned stations and empty rock to hide behind." Marcus picked up the harpoon gun. It was heavy and cold in his hands. He had used weapons like this to bring down 12 dragons. Each kill had made him more famous, more respected. Other hunters tried to copy his methods, but none of them understood what it really took to hunt these beasts. You had to think like them. You had to understand that they were not just big animals. They were smart, maybe smarter than humans in some ways. They could feel when humans were hunting them. They could sense fear and anger. Most hunters went after dragons with too much emotion, too much rage about the people who had died. That made them sloppy. That got them killed. Marcus stayed calm. He stayed focused. He studied his prey like a scientist and killed them like a soldier. That was why he was still alive when so many other hunters were dead. "Captain," James said, "I've been thinking about something. This dragon attacked differently than the others we've seen reports about. How so?" "Most dragons hit fast and run fast. They grab what they can and get out before humans can fight back. But this one took its time. It destroyed the power core first, which cut off communications. Then it went through the station section by section. That's not random animal behavior." Marcus looked at his weapons specialist. James was not the smartest man on the crew, but he understood fighting. He had been a soldier before joining Marcus's team, and he knew the difference between an animal attack and a planned assault. "You think this one is different?" Marcus asked. "I think this one is smarter," James replied. "Maybe older. Maybe more experienced." Rebecca turned in her chair. "There's something else, Captain. I've been looking at the energy readings from the attack. The dragon's breath weapon was more powerful than anything we've seen before. It melted through reinforced steel, like it was plastic." David nodded. "And the equipment it stole wasn't random either. It took specific pieces. Power generators, quantum processors, communication arrays, all high-tech stuff that would be very valuable." Marcus felt a chill run down his back. He had always known that dragons were dangerous, but if this one was planning its attacks, choosing its targets, taking specific equipment, then it was more dangerous than anything he had ever faced. "Set course for the asteroid field," he ordered. "All weapons ready, all systems at full power. We're going to kill this beast before it can hurt anyone else." But deep in his mind, Marcus wondered if this hunt would be different from all the others. Something about this dragon felt wrong. Something about the way it had attacked, the way it had escaped, the intelligence behind its actions. For the first time in his career as a hunter, Marcus Kane felt a small touch of fear. The stars continued to move past the window as the iron will flew toward its target. In the asteroid field ahead, something waited for them. Something big, something hurt, and something that might be much more than any human had ever imagined. The old space station floated like a dead giant among the asteroids. Its metal walls were dark and cold, with no lights showing in any of the windows. Marcus Kane studied it through his ship's cameras as the iron will moved closer. This was where the wounded dragon had gone to hide. "Life support systems are still working," David reported from his engineer station, "but everything else is shut down. No power to lights, computers, or communications. Perfect place for a hurt animal to rest," James said, checking his weapons one more time. "Dark, quiet, and plenty of places to hide." Marcus nodded, but something felt wrong. The station was too perfect, too convenient. It was almost like the dragon wanted them to find it here. "Take us to Docking Bay 7, Marcus ordered. "That's the closest to the main cargo area where our sensors show the strongest energy readings." The iron will connected to the station with a soft metal clang. Marcus stood up and grabbed his harpoon gun. The weapon felt heavier than usual in his hands. Rebecca picked up her tracking scanner. James loaded his neural disruptor and plasma rifle. David gathered his tools and emergency repair kit. "Remember the plan?" Marcus said as they walked toward the airlock. "Rebecca stays near the entrance with the scanner. She watches our backs and guides us to the target. James and I go in first with the heavy weapons. David follows with technical support." "What if it runs?" Rebecca asked. "It can't run far with that damaged wing," Marcus replied. "This station is big, but it's still a cage. We have it trapped." The airlock opened with a hiss of equalizing air pressure. The corridor beyond was completely dark except for the lights on their helmets. The walls were covered with scratch marks, deep gouges that could only have been made by dragon claws. The marks were everywhere, on the floor, the ceiling, the walls. It looked like the creature had been very angry when it arrived. "Jesus," David whispered. Look at the size of those claw marks. This thing is huge. Marcus touched one of the gouges. The metal was twisted and melted around the edges. It was hurt and angry when it got here, probably in a lot of pain. They moved deeper into the station, following the trail of destruction. Emergency doors had been torn from their frames. Support beams were bent and broken. In some places, the walls had holes melted completely through them. Energy readings are getting stronger, Rebecca said, looking at her scanner. It's definitely here. Maybe 2 levels down in the main cargo bay. As they walked, Marcus noticed something strange. The destruction was not random. The dragon had torn through specific areas. It had destroyed the communication center, the computer core, and all the security stations. But it had left other areas completely untouched. Food, storage, medical supplies, even valuable equipment in some sections was perfectly safe. This doesn't look like an animal hiding, James said quietly. This looks like someone clearing out defenses. Marcus felt that cold chill again. The same feeling he had experienced on his ship. This dragon was not acting like any creature he had ever hunted before. They found the entrance to the main cargo bay. The heavy metal doors had been ripped apart like paper and thrown aside. Beyond the doorway was darkness so complete that their helmet lights could not reach the far walls. It's in there, Rebecca whispered, staring at her scanner. Big energy signature right in the center of the bay. Marcus checked his harpoon gun. One more time. David, you stay here with Rebecca. James, we go in fast and hard. If we can hit it with the neural disruptor first, the harpoons should finish it. Roger that, Captain, James replied. They stepped into the cargo bay. The space was enormous, big enough to hold 3 ships the size of the Iron Will. Cargo containers were stacked everywhere, creating a maze of metal walls and shadows. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the huge space. Then they saw it. The dragon stood in the center of the bay, and it was the most beautiful and terrifying thing Marcus had ever seen. It was 30 feet tall from head to tail, with wings that spread even wider. Its scales were not just metal-colored like the report said. They held light inside them, like looking at stars through dark water. Its eyes burned with intelligence. And pain and something else that Marcus could not identify. The creature's left wing hung at a wrong angle, clearly damaged from the plasma cannon hit. Dark fluid dripped from the wound onto the metal floor. But even hurt, even trapped, the dragon stood with its head high and proud. Now, Marcus whispered to James. James raised the neural disruptor and fired. The invisible energy wave hit the dragon center mass. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the creature shook its great head and looked directly at them. The neural disruptor had done nothing at all. Impossible, James breathed. That should have dropped it instantly. The dragon moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. Its tail whipped around and smashed into a stack of cargo containers. The metal boxes exploded like bombs, sending pieces flying everywhere. Marcus dove to his left just as a chunk of steel, the size of a car, flew past his head. James fired his plasma rifle, hitting the dragon's shoulder. The energy blast should have burned through scales and flesh. Instead, it splashed off the creature's hide like water off glass. The scales are deflecting everything, James shouted over the noise of crashing metal. Our weapons aren't even scratching it. The dragon opened its mouth and roared. The sound was louder than a ship's engines, louder than an explosion. Marcus felt the vibration in his bones, in his teeth, in his heart. But there was something else in that roar besides anger and pain. There was communication. The creature was trying to tell them something. Marcus raised his harpoon gun and aimed for the soft area under the dragon's neck. His finger was on the trigger when something impossible happened. A voice spoke inside his head. It was not human speech. It was not words he could understand. But somehow the meaning was clear. The voice was old, older than anything Marcus could imagine. It was filled with sadness, so deep it made him want to cry. It spoke of loss, of watching worlds die, of being alone in the universe with memories that no other living being shared. The mental contact lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. Marcus saw images flash through his mind. A planet, with purple skies and silver cities. Beings like the dragon flying between the stars, not as destroyers but as guardians. A war that lasted for thousands of years against something dark and terrible. The slow death of an entire civilization. The vision ended and Marcus staggered backward. His finger had moved off the trigger. The harpoon gun felt wrong in his hands now, like he was holding a weapon against someone who had once been a friend. The dragon looked at him with those burning eyes. There was recognition there now. It knew that Marcus had felt the mental contact. It knew that something had changed. "Captain, what are you waiting for?" James shouted. "Take the shot." But Marcus hesitated. The creature was not just an animal. It was intelligent, maybe more intelligent than humans. It had a history, a culture, memories of things that happened before humans even existed. And it was alone. The last of its kind, carrying the weight of an entire dead civilization. The dragon spread its damaged wings and leaped toward the hole it had melted in the station's outer wall. It moved awkwardly because of its injured wing, but it was still faster than Marcus could react. "Stop it!" James yelled, firing his plasma rifle again and again. Marcus raised his harpoon gun, but his hands were shaking. The shot went wide, missing the dragon completely. The creature crashed through the station's hull and disappeared into space among the asteroids. James stared at Marcus in shock. "Captain, you had a clear shot. Why didn't you take it?" Marcus looked at his weapon and then at the hole in the wall where the dragon had escaped. He could not explain what had happened. He could not describe the voice in his head or the images he had seen. All he knew was that everything he thought he understood about these creatures was wrong. "It got away," he said quietly, but deep inside. Marcus Kane knew that something much more important had happened. The hunter had become the hunted. The prey had become the teacher. And nothing would ever be the same again. Outside the station, among the floating rocks and metal debris, the wounded dragon waited and watched. The human had felt the contact. The human had understood, at least a little. Maybe there was hope after all. Maybe the long war was not over yet. Marcus Kane could not sleep. For 3 days since the encounter at the old station, he had been lying awake thinking about the voice in his head, the dragon's voice. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those burning eyes looking at him with intelligence and pain. "Captain, you need to eat something," Rebecca said, bringing him a meal tray on the bridge. "You haven't touched food since we left the asteroid field." Marcus looked at the food but felt no hunger. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," James said from his weapons station. "You've been acting strange since that thing got away." "What happened in there? You had the perfect shot and you missed." Marcus turned to look at his crew. These people had followed him on dozens of hunts. They trusted him to make the right decisions. But how could he explain what he had experienced? How could he tell them that the monster they were hunting had spoken to him without words? "I want to keep tracking it," Marcus said. "Track what?" David asked. "It's gone, Captain. We lost the energy signature 2 days ago. The trail is cold." "Then we pick up a new trail," Marcus replied. "We follow the damage it's caused. We study its attack patterns. We learn where it's going next." James shook his head. "Captain, with respect, that dragon is probably halfway across the galaxy by now. We should report back to Colonial Command and let them know what happened." "No," Marcus said firmly. "We're not giving up." Rebecca exchanged worried looks with the others. "Marcus, maybe James is right. We could get backup, more ships, better weapons." "Better weapons won't help," Marcus said. "Did you see how our plasma rifles did nothing? How the neural disruptor failed completely? This creature is beyond anything we've faced before. Then why do you want to keep hunting it?" "David." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He stared out at the stars and tried to find words for what he was feeling, because I need to understand it. I need to know what it really is. For the next week, Marcus drove his crew to search every system in the region. They followed rumors and reports, checking each damaged station and attacked colony. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. The dragon was not moving randomly. It was following a specific path through space, hitting targets that seemed to have something in common. Look at this, Rebecca said, bringing up a star map on the main screen. All the attacks from the past 6 months. Mining Station Omega-7, Research Outpost Beta, Colony Ship Horizon, Terraforming Platform 7, they're all in a straight line across space. What's at the end of the line? Marcus asked. Rebecca calculated the trajectory. The Zarian system. 3 dead planets orbiting. A dying star. Dead planets, David repeated. Why would it go there? Only one way to find out, Marcus said. Set course for Zarian Prime. The journey took 5 days. As they approached the Zarian system, Marcus felt a strange pull, like something was calling to him. The feeling grew stronger as they got closer. To the first planet, Zarian Prime was a world of red sand and black rocks under a dim orange sun. From orbit, it looked completely lifeless. But their sensors picked up something unexpected. I'm reading structures on the surface, Rebecca reported. Big ones. They don't match any human architecture in our databases. Take us down, Marcus ordered. They landed near the largest structure, a massive building that looked like it was grown rather than built. The walls curved and flowed like water frozen in time. Strange symbols were carved into the surface, symbols that seemed to move when Marcus was not looking directly at them. The atmosphere is breathable, David said, checking his instruments. Thin, but we won't need suits. They left the ship and walked toward the alien building. Marcus felt the same strange pull he had experienced in space, but stronger now. Something about this place was important. Something about it was connected to the dragon. The entrance to the building was an archway tall enough for something much larger than humans to pass through. Beyond it, corridors stretched into darkness. Their helmet lights revealed walls covered with more of the moving symbols. This place is old, James said, his voice echoing in the empty halls. Really old. Thousands of years, maybe more. They walked deeper into the structure, following corridors that seemed to lead toward the center of the building. Along the way, they found rooms filled with strange devices, machines that hummed with power despite having no visible energy source. Screens that showed star maps of systems Marcus did not recognize. The technology is incredible, David whispered, studying one of the machines. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The power systems, the materials, the design. Whoever built this was far more advanced than we are. In the central chamber, they found something that took their breath away. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. In the center stood a statue of a creature that looked exactly like the dragon they had been hunting, but this was not just any dragon. The statue showed the creature in its full glory, with wings spread wide and scales that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. Around the base of the statue were smaller figures, also dragon-like but different in size and shape. A family, a species. They lived here, Rebecca said softly. This was their world. Marcus walked around the statue, studying every detail. The dragon's face was noble and intelligent, with eyes that seemed to look right through him. This was not a monster. This was a being of great dignity and power. Look at these walls, James called from across the chamber. The walls were covered with images carved in stone. Pictures that told a story stretching across thousands of years. Marcus saw dragons flying between stars, building great cities, creating wonders that humans could not imagine. He saw them as teachers and guardians, protecting smaller species and nurturing life throughout the galaxy, but the images also showed something else. A great war. Dragons fighting against enemies that looked like living shadows, battles that destroyed entire star systems. A civilization slowly dying as its people made the ultimate sacrifice to protect others. It's a history, Marcus realized. The complete history of their species. At the end of the wall, the images showed the last few dragons, wounded and alone, continuing to fight against the shadow enemies even as their worlds burned around them. The final image showed a single dragon, wings damaged, flying away from the ruins of its civilization. That's our dragon, Rebecca breathed. It's the last one. The only survivor. Marcus felt his heart break as he understood the truth. The creature they had been hunting was not a monster at all. It was the last guardian of a dead civilization, still trying to protect the galaxy from enemies that had destroyed its entire species. The attacks on human colonies, Marcus said slowly. It wasn't random destruction. It was trying to warn us about something, trying to drive us away from something dangerous. But what? David asked. Before anyone could answer, they heard a sound from outside the building. A deep musical roar that echoed across the dead landscape. Marcus knew that sound. He had heard it once before in the cargo bay of the space station. "It's here," James said, reaching for his weapon. "No," Marcus said, putting his hand on James's arm. "No weapons, not here. This is a sacred place." They walked outside and saw the dragon standing near their ship. In the dim orange light of the dying sun, the creature looked even more magnificent than before. Its scales glowed with inner light, and its eyes held depths of wisdom and sorrow that Marcus was only beginning to understand. The dragon looked at Marcus and tilted its great head. Then, without words, it began to walk toward another part of the ruined city. It moved slowly, limping slightly from its injured wing. But it kept looking back, as if waiting for them to follow. "It wants us to come with it," Rebecca said in amazement. "Where?" James asked nervously. Marcus shouldered his pack and started walking after the dragon. "To learn the truth. To understand what we're really dealing with." As they followed the creature through the ruins of its ancient civilization, Marcus realized that his life as a hunter was over. He was no longer tracking prey. He was following a teacher who was about to show him secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. Behind them, the statue in the great chamber seemed to watch with stone eyes as the last dragon led the first humans deeper into the mysteries of a dead world. The dragon led them through the dead city for over an hour. Marcus and his crew walked in silence, afraid to speak as they passed between towers that reached toward the orange sky like the bones of giants. The creature moved with purpose, its claws clicking softly on the ancient stone streets. They stopped at a building that was different from all the others. Where the other structures curved and flowed, this one was built in straight lines and sharp angles. The walls were made of a black material that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. The dragon turned to look at Marcus. For a moment their eyes met, and Marcus felt that strange mental touch again. Not words, but feelings and images. Trust, hope, and something else that made his stomach twist with fear. Urgency. The creature pushed against a section of the black wall with its massive head. The wall moved aside like it was made of liquid instead of solid matter. Beyond was a chamber filled with soft blue light. "What is this place?" Rebecca whispered. The dragon stepped into the chamber and gestured with its wing for them to follow. Inside, the walls were covered with hundreds of crystal formations. Each crystal was the size of a person and glowed with that same blue light. The air hummed with energy. Marcus approached one of the crystals and saw something incredible. Inside the crystal, moving images played like a movie. He saw dragons flying through space, but not the lonely, damaged creature they had been following. These dragons were healthy and strong, traveling in great flocks between the stars. "Memory crystals," David breathed. "They're some kind of recording system." The dragon walked to the center of the chamber and placed one massive claw on a crystal that was larger than all the others. Immediately, the entire room filled with light and sound. The air itself seemed to come alive with moving pictures. Marcus watched in amazement as the history of an entire civilization played out around him. He saw the dragon homeworld in its prime, a beautiful planet of silver cities and purple skies. He saw dragons not as destroyers but as builders and teachers. They traveled from world to world, helping younger species learn to use technology and develop their cultures. "They were explorers," Rebecca said softly. "Scientists and teachers." The images changed, showing dragons working alongside other alien species. They built great stations in space where different races could meet and trade. They protected small colonies from natural disasters. They shared their knowledge freely with anyone who wanted to learn. For thousands of years, the dragons had been the guardians of an entire section of the galaxy. They kept peace between worlds and helped civilizations grow and prosper. Marcus saw star maps showing hundreds of systems under their protection. Then the images changed again, and Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Something came out of the darkness between stars. The creatures in the recording looked like living shadows, shifting masses of darkness that seemed to eat light itself. Where they touched, stars went dark. Where they landed, planets became lifeless rocks. What are those things? James asked, his voice tight with fear. The dragon turned to look at him, and somehow Marcus understood the answer. These were the void consumers, beings from outside normal space and time that fed on life itself. They did not want territory or resources. They wanted to devour the life force of every living thing in the universe. The recording showed the beginning of a war that lasted for thousands of years. Dragons fought the shadow creatures across hundreds of star systems. But this was not a war that could be won with normal weapons. The void consumers could not be killed in any normal way. They could only be driven back, pushed into the spaces between dimensions where they belonged. Marcus watched as entire fleets of dragons sacrificed themselves to seal dimensional cracks that the consumers were using to enter normal space. He saw brave warriors flying directly into the shadows, using their own life energy to power ancient machines that could close the doorways between worlds. Slowly, at terrible cost, the dragons began to win. They drove the consumers back and sealed most of the dimensional barriers, but the war had destroyed their civilization. Planets were dead, cities were in ruins, and only a few dragons remained alive. The final images showed the last group of survivors, maybe 50 dragons in total, setting up a watch system. They would guard the sealed barriers, making sure the consumers could never break through again. They would sacrifice their remaining lives to protect all the other species in the galaxy. They saved everyone, Rebecca said, tears running down her face. They gave up everything to save everyone else. The recording changed one last time, and Marcus saw something that made his heart stop. The images showed human ships, human colonies, human mining operations, but they were not random pictures. They showed humans drilling into asteroids, building quantum research stations, and experimenting with dimensional technology. Every single human operation was located near one of the ancient barriers that kept the void consumers trapped. "Oh God," David whispered, "we're weakening the seals. We don't know what we're doing, but we're breaking down the barriers." Marcus understood now why the dragon had been attacking human colonies. It was not trying to hurt them. It was trying to stop them from accidentally destroying the ancient protections that kept the shadow creatures locked away. Mining Station Omega-7 had been built directly on top of a dimensional seal. The dragon had tried to drive the humans away before they could damage it. When that failed, it had attacked, trying to destroy the mining equipment before it could drill deep enough to break the barrier. It was trying to protect us, Marcus said. All this time, it was trying to save us from something we don't even know exists. The dragon stepped forward and looked directly at Marcus. This time, the mental contact was stronger and clearer than before. Marcus saw through the creature's eyes, felt its desperate loneliness and endless responsibility. For millions of years, it had watched over the barriers alone, the last guardian of a dead civilization. But now the barriers were failing. Human expansion and technology were weakening seals that had held for eons. Soon, the void consumers would break through, and this time there would be no dragon civilization to stop them. The creature showed Marcus images of what would happen if the barriers fell completely. Darkness spreading from star to star, consuming every living world. Earth itself becoming a cold, dead rock floating in empty space. How long do we have? Marcus asked out loud. The answer came not in words but in feelings. Not long, maybe months, maybe weeks before the first major barrier failed and the consumers began pouring through. "What can we do?" Rebecca asked. "How do we stop this?" The dragon moved to another crystal and activated it. This recording showed the ancient techniques the dragons had used to maintain the barriers. But it required two things working together: the energy manipulation abilities that only dragons possessed, and the quantum-sensitive neural patterns that were unique to certain species. Marcus watched the recording and realized something incredible. Humans had those neural patterns. Not all humans, but some of them. The same genetic quirks that made some people good at understanding quantum computers also made them able to work with dragon energy manipulation. "We can help," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him. "Humans and dragons working together, we can repair the barriers." But the dragon's response was filled with sadness. It showed Marcus the truth: it was the last dragon alive. Even if humans could learn to help, there was only one dragon left to teach them and power the ancient machines. That was when they heard the sound of ship engines outside. James ran to the entrance and looked up at the sky. "Colonial fleet vessels," he said grimly. "At least 6 ships, coming in fast." Marcus felt his heart sink. Rebecca had been transmitting their location data throughout their entire journey. Colonial Command knew exactly where they were. "They're here for the dragon," Marcus realized. "They want to capture it and study its technology." The dragon let out a low, mournful sound. It knew what was coming. It had seen other species try to capture and control dragon technology. It never ended well. Marcus looked at his crew, then at the ancient guardian who had trusted them with the greatest secret in the galaxy. He had to make a choice that would change everything. He could help the colonial fleet capture the dragon, and probably become the most famous hunter in human history. Or he could betray everything he had once believed to protect the creature that was trying to save them all. Outside, the fleet ships were landing. Soon, colonial marines would come, looking for them, and Marcus Kane would have to decide which side of an ancient war he was really on. Marcus Kane stood at the entrance to the crystal chamber and watched 6 colonial fleet ships settle onto the ancient landing pads outside the ruined city. Each ship carried 50 Marines armed with the latest weapons and armor. 300 soldiers against 4 humans and 1 wounded dragon. "Captain Kane, this is Colonel Williams of the Colonial Fleet," a voice crackled through Marcus's communication device. "You are ordered to stand down and surrender the alien creature immediately." Marcus looked back at the dragon, who was watching him with those burning eyes. The creature understood what was happening. It had probably seen this scene play out many times before with other species. The young race that discovered dragon technology, tried to capture it, and ended up destroying themselves. "What do we do?" Rebecca asked quietly. Marcus thought about his choices. He could walk outside, tell Colonel Williams where to find the dragon, and probably receive a medal for the greatest capture in human history. The scientists would study the creature, try to copy its abilities, and completely miss the real danger that was coming. Or he could do something that would make him an enemy of his own species. "James, can you sabotage their heavy weapons from here?" Marcus asked. James stared at him in shock. "Captain, that's treason. Those are colonial marines out there." "Those marines are about to capture the only being in the universe who knows how to save us from extinction," Marcus replied. "Can you do it or not?" James was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his technical kit. "Their ships use standard power coupling systems. If I can get close enough, I can overload their weapon arrays. But it won't stop their personal weapons." "Do it," Marcus ordered. "Marcus, are you sure about this?" Rebecca asked. "Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Marcus looked at the memory crystals still glowing around them. He thought about the images of dead worlds consumed by living shadows. He thought about Earth becoming a lifeless rock floating in space. "There's already no going back," he said. "The barriers are failing. If we don't help this dragon repair them, everyone we know is going to die." David was checking his equipment. "I can help James with the sabotage. My engineering tools can access their computer systems if we get close enough." The dragon stepped forward and placed its massive head close to Marcus. The mental contact was stronger than ever before. Marcus saw images of the coming battle, felt the creature's gratitude for his choice, and understood what they needed to do. "It has a plan," Marcus said. "But we need to get to the central control chamber deeper in the city. There's an ancient machine there that can reinforce the nearest barrier, but it needs both dragon energy and human neural patterns to work. The Marines won't just let us walk away, James pointed out. Then we fight, Marcus said simply. But we fight to protect, not to destroy. They moved quickly through the crystal chamber to a hidden exit at the back. The dragon led them through. Narrow passages that were too small for the creature to fly through but perfect for avoiding the Marines who were searching the main streets. As they moved, Marcus heard the sound of explosions in the distance. James and David had done their job. The fleet ships were sitting on the landing pads with dead weapon systems and confused crews. "This is Colonel Williams," the voice came through Marcus's communicator again. "You have committed acts of sabotage against colonial fleet vessels. Surrender now or face the consequences." Marcus turned off his communicator and threw it away. They reached the central control chamber just as the first Marines entered the ancient city. The chamber was enormous, filled with machines that hummed with power despite being older than human civilization. In the center stood a device that looked like a combination of computer and living organism. The barrier controller, Marcus breathed. This is how they maintain the seals. The dragon moved to the machine and placed its claws on specific points along its surface. Immediately, the entire chamber filled with energy. Screens activated, showing the status of dimensional barriers throughout the galaxy. Most were holding, but Marcus could see several that were flickering and weak. "Company," Rebecca called from the entrance. "Marines, about 20 of them, coming this way." Marcus looked at the machine, then at the dragon. "How long do we need?" The answer came as images in his mind. "At least an hour to properly reinforce even one barrier. Maybe longer for someone who had never used the technology before." "We don't." "Have an hour," James said, checking his weapon. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they surround this place." The first Marines appeared at the chamber entrance. They wore full combat armor and carried weapons designed to stop anything up to and including a small dragon. When they saw the creature standing at the ancient machine, they raised their rifles. "Step away from the alien immediately," the squad leader shouted. "This is your final warning." Marcus stepped between the Marines and the dragon. "That alien is trying to save your lives, you idiots." "Stand down, Kane," the squad leader ordered. "You're under arrest for treason and collaboration with hostile forces." "Hostile forces?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "The only hostile force here is human ignorance." The Marines opened fire. Marcus dove to one side as plasma bolts filled the air. The dragon roared and spread its wings, creating a shield of energy that deflected most of the shots. But some got through, and Marcus heard David cry out in pain as a bolt caught him in the shoulder. James returned fire with his plasma rifle, forcing the Marines to take cover behind the chamber's ancient pillars. Rebecca helped David to safety, behind one of the control machines. The dragon continued working with the barrier controller, even as weapons fire exploded around it. "More Marines coming!" Rebecca shouted over the noise of battle. "At least 50 more surrounding the building." Marcus realized they were trapped. Even if they won this fight, more colonial forces would keep coming. The fleet would call in orbital bombardment if necessary. They would destroy the entire city to capture the dragon. That was when the ancient machines suddenly activated fully. The chamber filled with blinding light as power flowed through systems that had been dormant for millions of years. Every screen in the room lit up, showing dimensional barriers throughout the galaxy. And then something went wrong. One of the barriers, weakened by decades of human mining operations, finally collapsed completely. On the screens, Marcus watched in horror as a dimensional crack opened near the outer edge of human space. Through that crack, darkness began to pour. The Void consumers had found their way in. The first reports came through the Marines' communication systems, ships going dark near the Centauri colonies, entire stations losing contact with no distress signals. Something was moving through human space, consuming everything in its path. "What the hell is that?" the Marine squad leader demanded. Staring at the screens in shock, the dragon turned from the machine and let out a roar that shook the entire building. But this was not a roar of anger or pain. It was a call to war. The ancient guardian was preparing for the battle it had been born to fight. Marcus felt the mental contact one more time. Images of the plan of what needed to be done. The dragon could fight the consumers, but only if the barriers were reinforced first. And that required both dragon energy and human neural patterns working together. "Lower your weapons," Marcus called to the Marines. "Look at those screens. Look at what's coming. That dragon is the only thing standing between us and extinction." The squad leader hesitated, confused by what he was seeing. In that moment of uncertainty, Marcus made his choice. He walked to the barrier machine and placed his hands on the human interface points. The dragon looked at him with something that might have been surprise, then placed its claws back on the dragon controls. Power flowed between them. Alien and human working together for the first time in history. Marcus felt the dragon's energy moving through him, felt his own neural patterns connecting with technology beyond human understanding on the screens. The nearest dimensional barrier began to strengthen and stabilize. "It's working," Rebecca breathed, but the effort was enormous. Marcus felt like his brain was on fire, like every nerve in his body was being torn apart and rebuilt. The dragon was giving everything it had, pouring its life force into the ancient machine. Outside the chamber, more Marines were arriving, but they had stopped shooting, staring in amazement at the screens showing the battle against the darkness. Some of them were beginning to understand that their real enemy was not the dragon. The question was whether Marcus and the dragon could finish reinforcing the barriers before the void consumers spread too far into human space, and whether either of them would survive the effort. The war that had destroyed an entire civilization was beginning again. The pain was like nothing Marcus had ever felt before. Dragon energy flowed through his human nervous system, burning and rebuilding every cell in his body. He could feel his DNA changing, adapting to work with technology that was older than his entire species. Blood ran from his nose and ears, but he held onto the control interface with hands that no longer looked completely human. Scales were growing along his arms, small and silver like starlight. His eyes burned with inner fire, but the connection was working. On the screens around them, dimensional barriers across the galaxy grew stronger as human neural patterns merged with dragon energy manipulation. The dragon beside him was changing. Too, where Marcus was becoming more dragon-like, the creature was becoming something new. It understood human thoughts now, human emotions and determination. For the first time in millions of years, it was not alone in the fight against the darkness. "The barriers are holding," Rebecca called out, watching the displays. "Most of them are stabilizing, but it was not enough. Even as they reinforced old barriers, new cracks were appearing. The void consumers were pushing harder now, sensing that their ancient enemy had found new allies. Reports continued to come through the Marines' communication systems, entire colonies going dark. Ships disappearing, without a trace. "There," Colonel Williams said, pointing at one of the screens. His voice was filled with horror. "That's the Titan research station. 5,000 people worked there." On the screen, they watched as the station's lights went out one by one. Something dark and shapeless moved around the structure, and wherever it touched, metal began to decay and crumble. Within minutes, the station was nothing but floating debris. "We need to seal the main breach," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "The crack they're using to enter our dimension. It's near the Centauri system." The dragon showed him images through their mental link. The breach was massive, growing larger every hour. Soon it would be too big to seal, even with their combined power. They had one chance to close it, but it would require them to travel there in person. "The fleet ships," Marcus said to Colonel Williams. "We need your fastest vessel." Williams stared at him. Marcus no longer looked entirely human, and the dragon no longer seemed like a monster. They were something new, something that might be able to save everyone. "The Starfire is our newest ship," Williams said slowly. "It can reach Centauri in 6 hours. "Get it ready," Marcus ordered, "and prepare your Marines for the strangest battle they've ever fought." 2 hours later, the Starfire jumped into hyperspace with the most unusual crew in colonial fleet history. Marcus and the dragon worked together in the ship's main cargo bay, using portable versions of the ancient technology to maintain barriers while they traveled. Rebecca coordinated with Fleet Command, trying to explain what was really happening. James and David worked with Colonial engineers to modify the ship's weapons for fighting enemies that existed partially outside normal space. Colonel Williams found himself taking orders from a man who was no longer entirely human, all to save his species from threats he had never imagined existed when they dropped out of hyperspace near Centauri. The sight that greeted them was worse than anything they had seen in the recordings. The dimensional breach stretched across space like a wound in reality itself. Through it, darkness poured like thick liquid, forming into shapes that hurt to look at directly. 3 void consumers had already fully entered normal space. They moved among the planets of the Centauri system, draining the life from everything they touched. Where they passed, stars dimmed and worlds became cold rocks floating in empty space. "My God," Williams whispered. "How do we fight something like that?" The dragon's answer came through Marcus. They could not fight the consumers directly, not with any normal weapon. But they could close the breach and trap the ones that had already entered. It would require all their power, and there was no guarantee either of them would survive. "Do it," Marcus said without hesitation. The Starfire moved toward the dimensional crack while its weapons tried to hold off the void consumers. The creatures seemed to sense what Marcus and the dragon were planning. They turned from the planets they were consuming and moved to intercept the ship. "Evasive maneuvers," Williams ordered. "All weapons fire at will." The modified plasma cannons had some effect on the shadow creatures, disrupting their forms for a few seconds. But they reformed quickly and continued their attack. One of them reached the ship and began draining power from the engines. "We're losing propulsion," the ship's engineer reported. "Hull integrity failing on decks 7 through 12. Marcus. And the dragon worked faster, pouring everything they had into the ancient machines. The breach began to shrink, but slowly. Too slowly? The consumers would destroy the ship before they could finish. That was when the other fleet vessels arrived. Captain Torres had convinced Fleet Command to send reinforcements. 20 ships jumped into the system, all armed with the new weapons modifications. They formed a protective circle around the Starfire and opened fire on the Void consumers. "This is for everyone who died at Titan Station," Torres's voice came through the communications. "All ships, concentrate fire on the shadow creatures. Keep them away from Kane and that dragon." The battle was fierce and costly. The consumers destroyed 4 ships within the first 10 minutes. But the combined firepower of the fleet was enough to keep them distracted while Marcus and the dragon continued their work. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding as the dragon energy flowed through him. He could see the dimensional barriers throughout the galaxy, could feel the places where reality was thin and vulnerable. He understood now why the dragons had been such effective guardians. They experienced space and time differently than other species, but he also felt his human perspective changing the dragon's understanding. Where the dragons had fought alone for millions of years, humans knew how to work together, how to coordinate and support each other. The dragon learned about cooperation and shared sacrifice in ways its species had never fully grasped. Working together, they began to close the breach faster than either could have managed alone. The dimensional crack shrank from kilometers to meters to barely visible lines in space. The 3 consumers that had entered normal space found themselves cut off from their source of power, without the connection to their home dimension. The shadow creatures began to weaken and fade. The fleet ships continued firing until the last traces of darkness disappeared into empty space. "Breach sealed," Rebecca reported from the Starfire's bridge. "Old dimensional readings are normal." Marcus collapsed next to the ancient machine, exhausted beyond measure. The dragon lowered its great head and touched Marcus gently with its snout. Through their connection, Marcus felt gratitude deeper than any human emotion he had ever experienced, but their work was not finished. There were other weak points in the dimensional barriers, other places where the consumers might try to break through. The galaxy was safe for now, but it would need constant protection. "What happens now?" Colonel Williams asked. Marcus looked at his hands, still bearing scales that caught light like stars. He could feel his enhanced senses detecting dimensional fluctuations that normal humans could not perceive. He was no longer entirely human, but he was not a dragon either. He was something new. "Now we prepare," Marcus said. "The consumers will try again. They always do. But next time we'll be ready." Over the following months, Marcus established a secret organization that he called the Dimensional Watch, working with the dragon, who chose the name Stellarion for human records. They trained volunteers from both the colonial fleet and civilian populations. Not everyone could make the neural connection with dragon technology, but enough could to create a network of guardians throughout human space. Rebecca became his second in command, learning to coordinate between human technology and dragon abilities. James led the weapons development program, creating new tools specifically designed to fight interdimensional threats. David worked with colonial engineers to build monitoring stations that could detect dimensional weaknesses before they became dangerous. The official records listed Marcus Kane as killed in action while fighting a hostile alien creature in the Zarian system. Only a few people knew the truth about what had really happened. To the galaxy at large, the famous dragon hunter had died fighting the monster he had tracked across the stars. They never learned that he had actually saved the dragon, and in doing so, saved all of them. Marcus often stood in the observation deck of his hidden base, watching new recruits learn to work alongside young dragons hatched from eggs found in ancient ruins. Humans and dragons training together, sharing knowledge and abilities that neither species could master alone. The partnership was not always easy. Dragons thought in terms of centuries while humans planned in years or decades. But together they were stronger than either species had ever been separately. The ancient guardians were no longer alone, and humanity had protectors who understood threats beyond anything they had imagined. Stellarion would often join Marcus in watching the training sessions. The great dragon had healed from its old wounds and regained its full power, but it had also gained something it had never had before: hope for the future.